Chapter number 1. My mother was in the backyard, starting the fire. Snatches of the prayer she was chanting reached me before I went out. I found her with her head lowered over the brazier, blowing gently to coax the charcoal into flames. The saucepan of water was ready by her feet. When she glanced around, I saw that the fire had darkened her face and brought tears to her eyes. I asked for the bed money, and she frowned as if loath to be disturbed from tending the flames. She reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out the knotted handkerchief in which she kept her money. The coins she put in my hand were warm from her body and felt soft and round without edges. "Don't take forever," she said, and turned back to the fire without raising her eyes to my face. I left the house without greeting her and was sorry as soon as my back was turned. She was then in her early 30s, but seemed older. Her hair had already turned grey, and the years had ruined her face, etching it with bitterness. Her glance was often reproachful, and the small acts of neglect provoked her into resentful stares. Sometimes her face came to life with a smile, but slowly and unwillingly. I felt guilty about her, but I thought she might have smiled to greet me into manhood. I walked through the dark alley that ran by the side of the house. Heavy dew had settled the dust in the air and glazed the tin roofs of the roadside huts. Although pitted and cratered with potholes, the road seemed more even and solid than the mud huts that flanked it. This was Kange, where the toilers and failures lived, where wizened prostitutes and painted homosexuals traded, where drunks came for cheap dandy, where anonymous voices howled with pain in the streets at night. An empty bus drove by, growling and lurching on the broken road. It was painted green and white, its headlights weak and yellow in the morning light. The clearing round the Magambaro tree was empty so early in the day. From the green moss came the hum of prayer. The faithful clustered in a saving huddle. In the distance, a cock crowed. Jagged ends of rock had thrust through the earth in the square, a paddle for unweary feet. With the rains, the earth would turn into fields of sprouting grass, but it was now the middle of the dry season. Kange was very near the sea. The taste was always in the air. On muggy days, a smear of salt would line the nostrils and ears. On soft mornings, a sea breeze came to chill the heart at the start of a new day. In years gone by, the slavers had walked these streets, their toes chilled by dew, their hearts darkened with malice. They came with columns of prime flesh, herding their prize to the sea. The Yemeni shopkeeper gave me the loaf of bread without a word. He wiped his hand on his shirt before taking my money, a mendicant's deference. On his face was a vile smile, but under his breath he uttered a muttered curse. I found my father praying when I got home. He was squatting on the ground in the backyard, his legs folded under him. His eyes were closed and his head was lowered on his chest. His hands, folded into fists, were resting on his knees. The index finger of his right hand pointing at the ground. I sliced the bread, then went to wake my sisters. They slept in my grandmother's room, the walls of which were always condensed with the smell of armpits and sweat. Her shrunken body lay in folds, arm hanging over the side of the bed. Zakia lay beside her. She was the elder of my two sisters, and she was already awake. Saida was always harder to rouse. She rolled away as I shook her, turning her back on me and grunting her discontent. I became irritated with her, and in the end held her by her shoulders and rocked her. "Hey, what are you doing?" snapped my grandmother, roused from her sleep by Saida's whining. "Be careful. Do you want to kill all of us? Be careful. Don't you ever listen?" We called her Bi Mabua, the elder mistress. She looked frail and kindly, but was cruel without mercy. I heard her muttering behind me as I turned to leave. "Don't say anything. Don't bother to greet anybody. Come back in here," suddenly shouting. "You little shit! Who do you think I am? Come back here." I stood outside the back door, waiting to give in to her screaming. I heard her wail for my father, her voice rising like someone in pain. He was still squatting in the yard in front of me, praying. My mother glanced at him, but his eyes were shut to the screaming around him. She shook her head at me. "There you go again." She hurried inside for my books, leaving me alone with my father for a moment. She gave me a slice of bread and a penny for a cup of tea. It was the morning of my 15th birthday. At Quran school, which I had attended from the age of 5, I had learned that boys become accountable to God at the age of 15. Girls reach this maturity when they are 9. It is to do with secretions, so God has decreed. "When you are 15, my father had told me, It's between God and you. Every sin you commit, His angels will enter in your book. On the day of judgment, the weight of the evil you have done will be measured against the good. If you obey the teachings of God, you will go to heaven. If you sin, you will burn in hell. You will burn to your bonds, then you will grow whole and burn all over again. And you will go on like this forever. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad, His Prophet. We must pray 5 times a day, fast during Ramadan, give zakat every year, and go to Makkah at least once in a lifetime if God gives us the means. God has divided hell into 7 depths. The deepest is for the liars and hypocrites, those who pretend to be devout when there is doubt in their hearts. Every day you must thank Him that you were not born a kafir or a savage, that you were born of parents who can teach you of His glory and His wisdom. You are one of the faithful of God, a creature of God. In a few years you will be 15, you will be a man. Learn to obey Him now, or you will burn forever in the fires of hell. On the morning I was 15, the same bus took me into school as did every other morning. The same faces were on the bus with me, the usual girls sitting together and apart from us, reared in the self-conscious anxiety in the presence of men. I searched among them for the one I favored. Her hair was spread across her shoulders. She held herself with a stiffness that made nonsense of my desires. The girl next to her looked gentler. They were sitting in front of me, and I did not even dare ask their names. I thought of dream nights when the blood flows warm. On the morning I became a man. On the way back from school, I went into the gloom of the whitewashed mosque. The floors were covered with gaily dyed matting for the congregation to sit on. I went in among them and opened my account with the Almighty. Clouds of dust rising and rising, churned up by tramping feet. Trees glare hard-headed at the noon sun, tortured by the power of the heat. The sea turns and turns and wastes and evaporates and turns into mist and vapor, coagulating in the chill that follows the sun. As I approached the waterfront, I could smell the fish market. Some of the fishermen were still about. Most of them worked at night and went home to sleep at the sound of the midday call to prayer. Every night they pushed their tiny boats into the water and disappeared. Some of them didn't return for several days, and then came back with a shark or a swordfish that they had defeated in battle. When I was younger, I used to think it was a glamorous and free life. a man's life. The salt wind from the sea washed over me. The smell of the docks round the curve of the breakwater mingled with the rumble of hooves. They were loading cattle for the islands. Livestock didn't do well on the islands because of tsetse. So every month local traders loaded diseased old barons into dhows and took them across. I saw Oldman Bakri walking along the muddy beach towards the steps. When I was small, Bakri used to tell me about the sea and fishermen. He was always kind to me. Sometimes he gave me a piece of roast cassava or some fish to take home. He said the sea frightened him. He said people didn't really know what the sea was like. A monster, he said, deep, deep, so deep that you can't believe it. There are mountains and plains and many human remains and sharks that feed. One day, and shrill cries of the water birds, a death pit. His body was like a wounded, deformed muscle. He squinted at me for a moment, and then he grinned. "How are you?" he asked. "And your father and your mother?" "Ahlan Masi Bakhari, they are well." "And school? Are you doing well? You'll be a doctor one day." He grinned. "All is well." He nodded his approval. "Alhamdulillah, say Alhamdulillah for these kindnesses that God shows us," he said, and waited for me to thank God too. "Oh well, I must be going to my bed. Give my regards to your parents." He waved his arm and walked away. An old man bent and bowed